Okay, well, Rick, thank you very much for taking the time to do this and to have this discussion. The first thing I would ask you is, obviously for the next mayor and council in Brandon, there's going to be a number of issues that you're going to have to address, and that will be part of your campaign and part of the next 4 years. Where does infrastructure rank as a priority in terms of a public issue for you as a candidate?
Well, it's definitely near the top. I would say that spending control and taxation control is probably at the very top for me, but infrastructure, and I guess probably the best way to put it would be to refocus our spending, especially towards infrastructure. There's been certainly a lot said in the past, like the 2012 budget for this city was earmarked as an infrastructure budget, and turned out to be a salaries budget. And so while we had a very large spike in taxes that year, very little of it ended up going to infrastructure. So certainly that I'm bullish on infrastructure, always had been when I was previously on city council, and to do so in a strategic way, with the partnerships that are available from especially senior levels of government. And those are coming to the forefront once again, so that's great news, and we need to be prepared to take advantage of those during the programs and during the years that those cost sharing programs are available. I remember previous times on council when those federal, provincial, municipal cost sharing programs were available, we would then really ramp up our capital spending on those years, because it's it stretches your dollar a long way. It's either 33-cent dollars or 50-cent dollars, and it's very important that a municipality is able to find the money by reallocating some priorities for a period of time to be able to do that.
Well, tell me a little bit how you would do that. Tell me a little bit about how you would try to refocus some of the existing money that is spent within the city. Like where would you be finding the money from within the existing city budget, and then how where specifically would you be trying to spend it?
Well, frankly, it would be reprioritizing issues to, I guess, with kind of an infrastructure mindset, that we would be just taking the view to funnel as much into infrastructure and away from spending that could probably wait, so that we can start to get after the infrastructure deficit that we certainly have, and every municipality in Canada has the same issue. So now it's a matter of how you manage that and how much you can accelerate your spending towards infrastructure. I would also place probably somewhat of a priority on neighborhoods that may be suffering some infrastructure shortcomings. We've got areas of the city that we kind of talk about flooding so often in this community, and it's relative to the river, but we've got neighborhoods in the community that are far removed from the river. But any major rainstorm, they're kind of flooded with overland flooding due to sewer, stormwater systems that are overcapacitated, and that's just not fair. We have to find ways of getting after those issues.
You're talking about better drainage, like that kind of thing for those areas?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, kind of on the outside looking in, I don't know about all the engineering that's being considered in some of these areas. All we know is that there's large neighborhoods in the community, some of which are relatively new, and I mean they've just barely got started, and they're already getting excess water running into the garages and down their streets and so on and so forth. We've got to rethink some of that.
Now, when you talked a moment ago about the infrastructure deficit and about how about managing that, and where specifically do you see that infrastructure deficit being? I mean, what kinds of things, do you see that need to be fixed in that respect?
Well, I think the biggest area, and it's just not that pretty or sexy to talk about, but I think that, we've got good buy-in from most citizens that I'm speaking with. A lot of it is, underground, and again, it's very typical of most cities in Canada. Brandon is, well over 100 years old, so some of the infrastructure, some of the water systems and sewer pipes and the like are very old, and we have to keep building on and keep building on new parts of the city. In the meantime, some of the original stuff is getting quite aged, and needless to say, you have to have a constant renewal, and people know that, and they buy into that, and I think feel that they are getting some value for money that is spent on that. In this city, taxes have been going up at an unacceptable rate with very little to show for it. At times, about the only thing we have to show for it is a larger municipal payroll, and that may not be certainly accelerating getting at this. So we're talking about and it's usually the whole package, of course, that it's tearing up the street, redoing the sewer and water. And then, of course, while you're at it, you are redoing the street, often the curbs and gutters, sometimes the sidewalks as well. And now that block or that series of blocks, is going to be now back up to snuff and be on the list for many, many years.
Do you think that you can tackle the infrastructure? I mean, you mentioned that your priority is to keep taxes under control, and you mentioned that a few times, but I mean, do you think that you can address the infrastructure deficit without raising taxes, or do you think that there are some other ways that you would maybe look at in order to be able to pay for what's needed in Brandon?
Again, I think that doing budgets is all about setting priorities, and so our greatest priority is channeling as much of the funds that we have available towards infrastructure. And some of the other things that may be nice to have may have to wait a little bit, and we have to do that. It's just kind of a balancing act, and making sure that as much money as we can is put towards infrastructure.
So you wouldn't consider raising taxes, like dedicating a certain amount from a property tax increase to finance infrastructure?
Okay, well, first of all, we're in the fortunate position here in Brandon of we are enjoying steady growth. The dividend to that is that our assessment is going up an average of 3% per year. So even if you didn't raise taxes at all, you've got 3% more money to work with just because your assessment has gone up. So that's a healthy amount of money to operate on. And again, I think the citizens, if the money is going to be spent properly and they can see the value for that, may not be opposed to tax increases that are up to or less than the rate of inflation. My first goal would be to try and keep it at zero, but to do things properly and to get cracking on this infrastructure, if we had to see small increases like that, the feedback I'm certainly getting from talking to residents is that they're okay for that when they can see tangible use of the money.
Right. What about other ways of financing infrastructure improvements? I mean, some people talk about selling city assets and diverting that money into fixing roads and sewer and water, or development charges, or some of these other things. I mean, are there other ways of raising money that you would contemplate or put forward?
Yeah, I don't know that, I know it's being talked in Winnipeg a fair bit. I don't know that we've got lots of city assets that could be available. I wouldn't be opposed to looking at some of that if there were some surplus city assets that we can sell to help accelerate spending on on infrastructure. Again, I'm not also opposed to looking at cost sharing, and again, that's why I emphasize the use of the multi-tiered approach to this. Like, that is a time, this is an investment that's being made, kind of nationwide, and we need to be able to take advantage of as much of that as possible. I know it's all taxpayers' dollars, whether it's coming federally, provincially, municipally, or all three. There's still only one taxpayer, but nonetheless, we need to access at least our fair share of it, because if we don't, it's going to be spent elsewhere.
From existing programs, or are there other ways that you think that you could go about trying to engage the federal and provincial governments for a greater share of money that could be used towards infrastructure?
I think so. I'm a kind of a solutions-oriented, kind of can-do individual. It's kind of the way I've operated my business and operated most organizations I've been involved with, and I would be looking for alternative ways to get as much done in infrastructure as we can. And it seems like such a big proposition, which it is. So rather than just throwing your hands up and say, well, it's just way too big, so let's not do anything. I kind of subscribe to the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So we just keep nibbling away at this infrastructure deficit, and just almost every spare bit of money that we can find needs to go there.
Yeah. Well, some candidates in other places, in Winnipeg, have talked about trying to get a greater share of the provincial PST, and that's been that's been something that other municipalities have called for in the past, and other reports in the past have talked about this as well. What about that aspect of it? Like, how would you? Is that something that you would be in favor of trying to get more a greater share of different like tax revenues from PST or other federal provincial sources?
Yeah, I think it would be. That said, it's kind of the senior levels of government responsibility to puzzle out how the money is going to flow sort of down the scale, the feds to the provinces to the municipalities, and so on and so forth. So if the money is there, we're not going to really be telling them how they ought to have gotten it. On the other hand, if there's opportunities to have programs where we can access slices of existing tax pieces for specific uses, I would certainly want to look at that.
Mm-hmm. What about planning, the planning aspect of infrastructure? Whether that's planning within the city or planning with other levels of government, how things are going to be fixed and how that's going to unfold. Do you have any specific ideas on how that could be improved?
Well, we I think we have a fairly strong planning component in Brandon, although it's certainly my desire to see it more streamlined and more consultative with the development community and so on and so forth. Developers with new developments in Brandon already by and large pay for the infrastructure that they require. Like, they're paying for the sewer and water and the streets and the curbs and sidewalks. That's all part and parcel of the development. So I think that's already working pretty well here in Brandon. If we can do things that are even more conducive, of course, to keeping Brandon growing, and ways that it could be a win-win between the city and the development community, I sure want to talk about it. It would certainly be my desire to be more consultative, more cooperative with the development community to create those win-wins.
One of the things with major infrastructure projects is you see sometimes, of course, and you seen it in Brandon and seen it in other communities, is the use of P3s, public-private partnerships. Where do you stand on that in terms of that as a potential solution to some of Brandon's major infrastructure challenges?
Well, as I indicated, I mean, the development community is already basically responsible for their piece of that infrastructure, you know, the initial infrastructure provision for any new developments. Similarly, there's typically private involvement, you know, like if you've got a new industry as an example, and you know they're going to need a larger water line, they're going to need their facilities serviced. You know, there's typically a component that belongs to the developer, if you will, to the industry that may be coming. In terms of you know, there's been talk of other novel ways where, and I guess this is American style, where they kind of get into toll roads as an example. Would be almost a kind of a P3 where, you know, perhaps it's the state doing it, but there's been even advocated that a private developer can say, here, I'll build you a road and you just allow me to charge a toll from it. I'm not sure within a city the size of Brandon that we're quite ready for that, but once again, as I indicated, I'm a solutions oriented and kind of prepared to talk about anything type of thing. I've not seen a model that would be a sort of a slam dunk.
Well, like the Chief Peguis extension in Winnipeg, I mean, that was built through a public-private partnership, or the Moray Street Bridge, like in Charleswood, that's a privately built bridge that would, you know, goes, you know, between Portage and Roblin Boulevard. I mean, it's something like that. I mean, I know Brandon has a P3 with the wastewater treatment plant, but right. Would you consider P3s, I guess, for any other major infrastructure need, like the 18th Street Bridge, or
it's a possibility, although I'm not sure. You know, okay, so how does the partnership work on say the Moray Street Bridge? Like, who's the other partner? How are they getting paid?
I'm not sure the exact partner, but my understanding is that private company designs and builds it, and then has it for a certain amount of time, and they're paid for it over the life of it, like 30 years or 40 years or whatever it happens to be. Yeah, and that you see that. I mean, Regina just built a wastewater treatment plant. Similar kind of a process, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Some of those, because they're more of a utility, wastewater treatment plants and water treatment plants, because they're a utility. I mean, you can build those, and now it's kind of a standalone. I mean, now you get the utility charges, of course, that are going to take care of it, like a kind of a bridge, unless it's a toll bridge. To me, it sounds a little bit more like just an alternative financing scheme. Like if your municipality is a little bit tapped out in terms of its ability to borrow in the normal debenture market, for example, and so now you're going to partner with someone else, and you're still going to make the payments. I don't see where the advantage would come in, and to be honest with you, presumably the as much as I'm a business person, and I'm all for private enterprise and so on and so forth. This would seem to me that if I'm the guy that was going to build you a bridge, and then I'm going to try, I need to make a margin on that. So I'm not sure that there would be a big advantage to the city. Obviously, they had an equation that they feel is advantageous. I'd love to have a look at one of those and see if there is some advantage to it.
Right.
My first reaction is that it's not likely the case.
But you'd be open to looking at it.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. To what extent are you familiar with the Infrastructure Funding Council report that the Manitoba Heavy Construction Association was involved in drafting?
Yeah, just vaguely. It just got sent to us here recently, and it's rather enormous, and we've got a lot of priorities. I look forward to spending more time on it, and I'm glad that it's being given that level of study and seriousness, because I think it is actually one of the larger issues and priorities throughout Canada. That again, you don't really have to be a rocket scientist to realize that infrastructure that was placed as Canada was growing is aging, and if it hasn't been renewed, needs to be renewed. And while we have need for brand new stuff, we also have to go backwards and renew the stuff that we put in over the last many decades. So it's a big issue. I can't remember what the number is nationwide, but it's billions.
Several billion,
yeah.
How would you go about trying to see that the recommendations in that document are implemented here in Brandon?
Well, I don't think we do good enough job in consulting, with certainly other municipalities. We probably do a decent job of consulting with smaller municipalities that are near us. I'm not sure that we've got the relationship that I'd like to have with the city of Winnipeg. And although I realize that there's quite a disparity between our two sizes, I mean, we are still the largest and second largest cities in Manitoba, and I would like to certainly get closer with the council and mayor of the city of Winnipeg, and have our administration's trade notes. And it can go both ways, by the way. Periodically I see Winnipeg dealing with challenges. I'll think of like the automated garbage system, and watching the news as they're trying to figure it out and roll it out and whatnot. Well, we've actually got a pretty good one. We've had, Brandon was a early adopter of automated. In fact, we're on our second one. I think our first one has got to be at least 25 years ago, and they would be talking to Edmonton and so on and so forth, and I'm kind of going, seriously? Like, we're just kind of down the street here, so to speak, and we've got a pretty good one. I mean, it's not just a little tiny place. I mean, we're picking up garbage from 50,000 people, and I thought, and forgive me, maybe they did consult. I didn't hear about them.
Perimeteritis strikes again.
Yeah, and so as I say, can work both ways. Like, I mean, there's lots of things that we could learn from a bigger city like Winnipeg, and I think we've got some things that, and it would be beyond me why we wouldn't be sharing as much as we possibly could.
Sure. One of the things, the way that infrastructure is defined in a lot of these reports is the way that you have your core infrastructure, obviously, which we've mostly been talking about: streets, roads, underground stuff, flood protection, that kind of thing. And then you have the social infrastructure piece, which, recreation facilities, arenas, libraries, things like that. So when we talk about, and there's an infrastructure deficit considered, but we can take those buildings into consideration as well. So for you, how would you try to strike a balance between, when we talked about the need to invest in core infrastructure, but what about on the social infrastructure piece of it? Like, where do you see the spending? How would you prioritize spending in that area?
Yeah, well, it's a consideration as well, and I guess I hadn't used the term social infrastructure before for these sorts of things. They're still part of our overall infrastructure. They're almost kind of like the assets of the city, which certainly includes parks and walking paths and playgrounds and recreation facilities. And we have a significant issue in that regard. And
Bob 101, please. Bob 101.
Sorry about that.
No.
So as an example, we've had 2 significant flood occurrences. We've invested a fair bit of our park space. I don't know the exact acreages. They just started a new green space master plan study here in Brandon. The first consultation of that was just last week that I attended. But if we added up the total amount of acreage devoted to green space and parks in Brandon, which includes our river corridor. I'm guessing that 75% of all of our acreage is along that river corridor. So in totality, we've got lots of acreage for parks and recreation, except 75% of it has been subject to significant flooding and damage the last 3 or 4 years. And now, we had not a bad parks system inclusive of that. Now we're a little bit upside down because we've got stuff that's severely damaged, including a golf course, including our largest soccer field, the Optimus Soccer Park, that I think has about a dozen soccer pitches there. It's been constantly under, it's pretty much probably a write-off. So we've got this other layer of consideration that has to be, and my view about everything is that, we have to strike a balance in dealing with all of this. So in other words, we won't be able to just put all of the money underground, but at the same time, we would be able to put all of the money into, restoring the riverbank, or all of the money into, redoing soccer parks. So we've got to, it's the elephant that we've got to bite, or you might even say we got several elephants, and we got to be.
Yeah. Where would you put the balance in that respect? Like where, what would you prioritize over others?
Well, I would lean more on and.
Maryland 101, please.
Okay.
Maryland 101.
Like I might call it 2/3. Like I haven't seen the numbers. Like we would need to kind of quantify our issues and kind of go about it in a logical fashion, I guess would be my. I wouldn't want to just kind of put arbitrary percentages on it and say, well, let's actually devote 2/3 of the money to, I guess you call it core infrastructure, and then the other third will go to this other stuff. We would kind of need to see what would be logical, like maybe the number ends up being 60-40 to really kind of go at this in a logical fashion. And that's kind of how I operate, is I want to see this dealt with. So again, considering all of that as being part of city assets and part of infrastructure, that's part of the overall priority. I want to see as much money that we're currently spending earmarked for these purposes.
Sure. Anything else you want to add? I think that's everything specific I wanted to touch on. But unless you
No,
have any
not
other
really.
comments?
Other than I was glad to see you guys are on this. I'm bullish personally on infrastructure, and I think with organizations and this level of detail that's being made available does certainly help the cause, because it will help councils to make their residents realize the importance of infrastructure, how far behind we are in infrastructure, and will provide a better buy-in on their part. I think we've got a pretty good buy-in in Brandon about infrastructure, and I think that people do see that as a valuable place to put their money. So I think that we will have pretty good buy-in, and kind of always have had. I think, as in times in the previous years that I've been on council, when council has had to amp up spending, capital spending, because of the fact that there was a federal provincial program that we could access. So if we had spent $2 million on capital spending the year before, and then this year we're going to spend 4 or 5 because of the fact that we can get matching funds and take our $5 million and turn it into 15. I think generally speaking the residents were pretty happy with that, because we were able to accelerate things, whether it be a wastewater treatment plant, whether it be underground infrastructure. You just have to get that additional support. And to me, it's kind of a good deal, you know, even for the federal government. I mean, they're saying, hey, we're allocating money as long as you do. And, you know, so obviously there's not going to come a time, you know this by now, they're not going to come along and say, don't worry, folks, we're going to take care of it. You know, we're just funding the whole thing. You know, we know that typically the best we can do is typically three-way funding, and we need to gobble up as much of that as we can.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good.
Appreciate you doing this.
Pleasure.